If you clicked this, you already saw it. 62 crossed out, 70 crossed out. And that's not a trick. I mean it. The answer to the biggest money decision of your retirement is not 62, it's not 67, and it's not 70. Now, I'm not going to insult you with some secret fourth age nobody's talking about. There isn't one. Here's what I'm actually going to give you, and it's worth more than any age. By the end of this video, you'll be able to figure out your number. The right one for your health, your marriage, and your money. And I know the second you hear health, marriage, money, it starts to sound complicated. It isn't. It's actually dead simple, and I'll walk you through it step by step over the next few minutes. You'll know it cold. No guessing. No hoping you picked right. No waking up at 80 realizing you left $100,000 on the table. And here's my promise about how we do it. You will not need to be a finance person to follow this. No spreadsheet, no calculator, no degree. Every single time I use a term that sounds complicated, I'll stop and explain it in plain English the second it comes up, so you never once feel lost. This video is made for the regular person standing at this exact crossroads, trying to make one enormous decision without getting a finance degree first. If that's you, you're in exactly the right place. Stay with me, because it starts with one man most people have never heard of. He spent his entire career inside the Social Security Administration, the government agency that actually cuts these checks. And he personally handled hundreds of thousands of retirement claims, more than almost anyone alive. So when he got asked the exact question tearing up the internet right now, claim at 62 or wait until 70, you'd expect a clean answer. He refused to give one. Not because he didn't know, because he understood something the people screaming about it don't. And in about 10 minutes, so will you. Why everyone's fighting. Let me show you why this fight even exists, because once you see it, the whole thing gets simple. Social Security lets you start your checks anytime between 62 and 70, and the deal the government offers is straightforward. The longer you wait to start, the bigger your monthly check, permanently. Start at 62, the earliest age allowed, and you lock in the smallest check. In fact, you get about 30% less every month for the rest of your life, compared to waiting until your full retirement age. That phrase, full retirement age, just means the age the government treats as your normal, on-time retirement. For basically everyone watching this, that age is 67. Now wait all the way to 70, the latest it ever makes sense to wait, and your check comes out about 77% bigger than it would have been at 62. Let me put that in real dollars. Say your check at 62 would be $2,000 a month. Wait until 70, and that same check becomes roughly $3,500 a month. Same person, same work history, just a different start date. So one camp looks at that and screams, "Wait, get the big check." The other camp screams right back, "Take it early, get your money while you still can." Both camps are all over your feed, both sound confident, and both are missing the exact same thing. Here's what neither side wants to admit. Neither number is the answer, because the answer was never a number at all. It's the answer to 4 simple questions about your life. Let's walk through them, one at a time. By the 4th, you'll know your number. Question 1. How long are you actually going to live? I know. Nobody wants to think about that on a Tuesday, but stay with me, because this one question does more of the work than the other 3 combined. Here's why it matters. There's something called the break-even age. Sounds technical, it's dead simple. It's the age where waiting finally pays off. Before that age, claiming early put more total money in your pocket. After that age, waiting wins. For most people comparing 62 versus 70, that break-even age lands somewhere around 80. So the whole decision quietly comes down to a single bet. Do you think you'll live well past 80 or not? Live long past it, and waiting wins big. Fall short of it, and claiming early was the smarter call. And this is exactly where most people trip. They picture themselves and think, "Hey, I'll probably make it to 78, maybe 80. But that gut feeling is almost always too low. According to the government's own life expectancy tables, an average 65-year-old man today lives to about 83, and an average woman to about 85. And here's the part people miss completely. Those are averages. Half of everyone who reaches 65 lives longer than that. Plenty reach their 90s. Now, if you have a serious health condition, or the men in your family rarely see 70, that honestly changes the math, and claiming early can be exactly right for you. No shame in it. But if you're in decent health, be very careful about betting on a short life, because it's the one bet where being wrong is brutal. Let me show you why. Think about the 2 ways this can go wrong. If you wait for the bigger check and you die early, yes, you technically lost, but you're gone. You don't feel it, and you didn't need the money anyway. Now flip it. You grab the small check at 62, and then you live to 95. Now you're stuck with that smaller check for 33 long years, in the exact stretch of life when you can least afford to run short. One mistake costs you nothing you'll ever feel. The other one follows you for decades. That's not a small detail. That's the whole reason waiting is safer than it looks. Question 2. Are you married? Because if you are, this decision was never just about you. And this is the single most overlooked point in the entire debate. Here's the rule in plain English. When one spouse dies, the survivor does not keep both checks. They keep the bigger of the two, and the smaller one disappears. That's called the survivor benefit. All it means, the higher check becomes the surviving spouse's check for the rest of their life. Sit with what that means. If the higher earner in a couple waits and builds up that big $3,500 check, then passes away first, the surviving spouse inherits that $3,500 check and lives on it maybe for another decade or more. But if that same higher earner grabbed the small $2,000 check early, then the survivor is stuck with $2,000 for the rest of their life. So for couples, the smartest move, and this is the one thing nearly every researcher agrees on, is usually for the higher earner to wait as long as possible, ideally to 70. Not for themselves, for whoever's left behind. Meanwhile, the lower earner can often claim earlier without much cost at all. See what happened? The question stopped being, "What's my number?" and became, "Who in this marriage should wait?" Totally different question. And if you're married and no one has ever told you this, that might be the most valuable 90 seconds of this whole video. Question 3. Are you going to keep working after you claim? This one's short, but it trips up a shocking number of people, and it can quietly cost you real money you never saw coming. Here's the trap. If you claim your Social Security early, before that full retirement age of 67, and you're still working and earning a decent paycheck, the government temporarily holds back part of your check. It's called the earnings test. In 2026, the line sits at about $24,480 a year. Earn more than that from a job, and for every $2 you go over, they hold back $1 of your Social Security. So picture someone who claims at 63, figuring they'll collect their Social Security check and keep their full salary. If they're earning a normal full-time income, a big chunk of that check, sometimes all of it, just doesn't show up. They claimed early and got almost nothing extra for it. Now, quick piece of good news, so this doesn't scare you off. That held back money isn't gone forever. The government gradually pays it back once you hit 67. But the simple takeaway is this. If you plan to keep working a real job in your early 60s, claiming early often makes no sense at all. Wait until you've actually stopped, or until 67, when this rule vanishes completely and you can earn anything you want. Question 4. Do you actually need the money at 62, or will it just sit there? This is where it gets personal, and where the claim early camp makes their best point. So let me give it to you fairly, because they're not wrong. Their argument is this. $1 in your 60s is worth more to you than $1 in your 80s. And honestly, they've got a point. Researchers who study how retirees really spend even have a name for it. The go-go, slow-go, no-go years. Plain version. In your 60s, you're active. You travel. You do the things you spent your whole life putting off. By your 80s, whether you like it or not, you naturally spend less. Not because you got disciplined, but because you slowed down. Spending quietly drops as people age. So $1 at 62 might genuinely buy you more life than $1 at 85, if you're actually going to use that money in your go-go years. The trip, the grandkids, the thing you always said someday about. That's a real honest reason to claim early. Nobody gets to shame you for spending your own money on your own life. But here's the counter, and it matters. Some people say, I'll claim early and just invest the money instead. Let it grow in the stock market. On paper, if the market cooperates, that can win. Be careful though, because you'd be trading something rare for something risky. Waiting on Social Security gives you a bigger check that's guaranteed, backed by the government, and rises with inflation every year, for as long as you live. There's a fancy term for that. Longevity insurance. All it means is protection against the one risk you truly can't predict. Living longer than your money lasts. The stock market can't promise you that. It can drop 30% right when you need it most. So, Just invest it sounds clever, but you'd be swapping a sure thing for a maybe. Put it together. This is your number. So now, take your 4 answers and stack them up. This is your number. Good health, or you expect a long life. Lean toward waiting. Married, and you're the higher earner. Lean hard toward waiting to protect the person you leave behind. Planning to keep working in your early 60s? Don't claim early. You'd just lose part of the check anyway. But if your health is genuinely poor, or you truly need the money now just to live, or you're single with a real plan to enjoy those early years, then claiming early isn't a mistake at all. It might be exactly right for you. See what we did? We never landed on 62 or 67 or 70. We landed on you. And that's the thing the man from the Social Security office understood that the whole internet doesn't. There is no winning age. Anyone selling you one magic number in either direction is selling you someone else's answer to your question. The honest part. Let me be straight with you, because I'd rather earn your trust than clickbait you. There is no shame in claiming at 62 if that's where your 4 answers point. The people who claim early aren't fools. A huge number of them are making exactly the right call for their situation. The only real mistake is claiming early by accident, grabbing the small check on a feeling without ever asking these 4 questions and finding out too late that you left money or security or your spouse's whole future on the table. So here's what to do today. Go open a free account at the government's own site, ssa.gov, and look up your real numbers at 62, at 67, and at 70. Takes about 5 minutes. Then run your 4 answers. Your health, your marriage, your work, your need. That's your decision, not mine. Not a thumbnail's, not your neighbor's, yours. And here's the part almost nobody thinks about until it's too late. The day you claim, that check becomes fixed, the same amount month after month for the rest of your life. So the real skill was never just picking the right age. It's making a steady fixed income go further than you ever thought it could. There's a quiet little method out of Japan that does exactly that. It's helped ordinary people live richer lives on smaller fixed incomes for over 100 years, and it's the natural next step from the decision you just made. I broke the whole thing down right here. I'll leave it right here. See you there.